All right, so here we are back at the second video, continuing on with our predator-prey discussion. Here we're going to start off by talking about some quote-unquote habitat interactions you might expect. So at the very end of the last video, we talked about how management choices you make might have some unintended consequences, right? And this is a lot of what those sorts of things might end up being, right? So when we change the habitats, we might kind of put ourselves in a situation where maybe we've been managing for one thing or another, or maybe we haven't been managing at all. Maybe development or something else has come in and otherwise altered the landscape. Whatever the ultimate root cause, a lot of what happens when we alter a landscape is we make life harder on prey. Right? We make it easier for them to be hunted and killed, including things like loss of refuge, so a place where an animal might go to hide, right? Or a place where maybe a predator can't get to, okay? And then also what we call it sort of an escape terrain, a place where, again, they can kind of lose a predator in that as they run away. One of the things that we have to make hard choices about is fire suppression, right? There's been lots of jokes about raking the woods and stuff like that. Well, I'm not going to get into it, but that is a fire suppression management technique, something that we might do to try to avoid massive forest fires, right? But by doing that, okay, we actually alter kind of the pathway of normal succession, right? We might get rid of a lot of maybe refuge or escape terrain. We have the possibility of doing that. Things that we're not responsible for, right? Drought can concentrate animals at water, but just like we saw at the last chapter, we can also concentrate animals at water via management practice. Okay, so again, we always need to be aware of not only what are we doing, but what is happening to the environment to kind of understand how changes in these interactions might occur. So how do we model this stuff? We're not going to get into them here. We'll talk about this if you go on, you take ecology with me later on when we do upland ecosystem management in another course. We'll go into these in detail. But the Lacta Volterra predator-prey model is actually supposed to have 2 R's. Lacta Volterra is basically a set of equations that we can use to model predator-prey relationships, amongst other things. And within these models, what we end up getting is that we see a kind of an offset cycle, right? So as prey populations rise, predator populations will also rise, but lagging behind it a little bit. And as we get more predators, we start to lose prey. And then as prey populations decline, predator populations decline, but again, lagging behind that a little bit. And coming out of this here is an important concept here called the functional response, right? And the functional response basically is how the up and down population of the predator affects the up and down population of the prey. Okay, the numerical response is another idea, okay, another related concept, and this is rather than the rate at which those things change, it's the number, right? So the actual population change. This is the rate of population change. Functional and numerical response, both very, very important in terms of modeling what we expect to happen. Here we've got 3 different models for functional response. Okay, type 1 here in the solid line, type 2 here in the sort of the broad dashed line, and then type 3 in the tight dashed line. And what we're seeing here, basically just 3 different relationships between predators and their prey. So for type 1 here, this solid line, what we see first off is that For every increase in prey, we see a corresponding direct increase in prey capture rates, right? So the more of them there are, the faster, the easier they are to catch. Okay, and so this is something we might expect to see in prey items that don't hide very well or are highly abundant, right? Eventually, it's going to taper off, right? Eventually, we get to a point where we're going to kind of have this flat line. At this point, right, there's simply not enough animals to capture, right? You can only fit so much in your mouth at one time, right? And so for type 1, we increase our capture rate up until we meet our limit on how many we can capture. There's just not enough hours in the day, not enough space in the mouth, right? With type 2, this sort of broadly dashed line, we see we have this early fast increase that kind of slows through time, right? So small, when prey sizes are small, any increase in the amount of prey has a big impact. But as prey populations get bigger, adding one more doesn't have as big of an effect, okay? There's a very strong threshold here with these guys, right? This is often true for cryptic species, right, where they're harder to find, right? If you start taking a whole bunch of them and putting them in one place, you become easy to see, but eventually there's just not enough. It doesn't help at a certain point. And then with type 3 here, we have this sigmoid curve that we've seen before for population growth. Low predation rates at low population sizes, very, very rapid increase in predation rate at intermediate prey size abundances, and then kind of, again, tapering off. Again, once we hit some sort of threshold density. And that's all this is. And I'll leave this up here for a second just so you can see it. You can pause the video if you need to come back and look at it again, but that's really just what this is about. Now, getting at those numbers is tough. Predators tend not to want to just hang out and be watched, right? They move around an awful lot. They don't stay in one place like, say, a lot of prey species do. And so they're hard to monitor. They're hard to assess. We can radio tag them. Kind of the easiest way for us to do that. And we can monitor survival for prey items, particularly, is really what we're doing there. And sometimes, well, not always, sometimes if we do find them no longer moving, we can go find their carcass and figure out what killed them. But again, that's a bit dicey as a proposition. One thing that we need to be worried about here, though, is that by radio tagging an individual, you might make them more likely to be killed. So we might be unintentionally biasing individuals to be killed by slapping a radio on them. So that is something to consider there for a little bit. It is very, very, very hard, like I said, to assign a predator to a kill, right? Certain animals leave very specific traces, so cougars, wolves in particular, but a lot of predators, you can't, and particularly for birds, because birds tend to swallow their prey whole. It's really hard to assign a very specific animal to that. So we can use video monitoring. We can start to, in addition to a radio collar on certain prey mammals, we can actually stick a little video camera on there as well, like a little trail cam. But this is, it's a lot of work. It's really, really a lot of work. So to kind of get around that, we can estimate a lot of these rates using things like how much food does a particular prey animal need, or predator animal need in a given day, right? What is the available biomass of all the prey items it might choose, right? And what is the rough proportion of those prey items in their diet, right? Now, part of the problem there is like when you go to the store, right? You go to the butcher counter and you buy a T-bone, right? Well, the problem with the T-bone is that you buy it by weight. And not all of that steak is steak. A lot of it is the bone, right? There's a big chunk of the scapula in there that you're getting with the steak. And the same thing is true here when we think about biomass of prey items, right? They don't eat everything. They can't eat everything necessarily. And depending on a lot of different things, not even just the kind of predator, but time of day or preference or whatever. How much doesn't get eaten varies quite a bit, right? And for some predators, more than others, daily food requirements can change a lot, right? If you take a big item one day, you might not need to eat tomorrow, right? So again, something to consider there is the variability within that food requirement. Okay, so we'll call this one short here just to make a nice short video. When we come back, we'll talk about predator control as a management technique, and we'll finish off the chapter.